Most people don't fail at changing their habits because they lack discipline. That explanation is convenient, but it's wrong. The truth is more uncomfortable. Most people fail because they are using a system that was never designed for how the human mind actually works. If you look back at your own life, you'll probably see the same pattern repeating itself over and over again. A surge of motivation appears out of nowhere. Maybe it's the start of a new year, a bad medical report, a breakup, a moment of shame in front of the mirror, or simply waking up one morning and deciding that enough is enough. In that moment, everything feels clear. You promise yourself that this time will be different. This time, you won't make excuses. This time, you'll go all in. So you change everything at once. You cut out sugar, junk food, late nights, alcohol, distractions. You wake up earlier than usual. You start exercising every day. You make strict rules and dramatic declarations, sometimes even telling other people about your new plan so you'll feel accountable. For a few days, maybe even a couple of weeks, it works. You feel powerful. You feel proud. You start to believe that you've finally figured it out. And then life happens. Work gets stressful. Family responsibilities pile up. You miss one workout, then another. You eat one meal you weren't supposed to. You stay up late one night, and suddenly something shifts inside your mind. A single thought appears, quiet but dangerous. I've already failed. That thought is where most transformations die. Not because of the missed workout or the unhealthy meal, but because of what that slip means to you. It feels like proof. Proof that you're the kind of person who can't stay consistent. Proof that discipline just isn't in your nature. Proof that no matter how hard you try, you always end up back in the same place. So you stop. Not dramatically, not with a conscious decision, you just slowly let go. The routine fades, the promises are forgotten, and a few weeks later you're right back where you started, sometimes even worse than before. Heavier, more tired, more distracted, more disappointed in yourself. Over time, these failed attempts stack up. Each one leaves a mark, and without realizing it, you stop seeing them as isolated events and start turning them into an identity. You don't say, "I failed again." You say, "This is just who I am," someone who lacks willpower, someone who starts strong and quits early, someone who knows what to do but never does it. That identity becomes heavy. It follows you quietly through your days, shaping your decisions before you even make them. Why try again if you already know how it ends? Why start something new when experience has taught you that you won't finish it? What makes this trap especially cruel is that from the outside, it looks like a personal flaw. Productivity gurus, motivational speakers, and even well-meaning friends reinforce this idea, often without realizing it. They talk about grinding harder, pushing through pain, waking up earlier, wanting it badly enough, and every time you hear that message, something inside you shrinks a little because you've wanted it badly. Many times, you've pushed yourself, you've sacrificed comfort, and still, you ended up right back where you began. So if wanting more and trying harder didn't work, what does that say about you? Here's the part nobody tells you. The problem was never your character. The problem was the strategy. Most systems for change are built around intensity, speed, and dramatic effort. They assume that humans can simply decide to become a different person overnight and sustain that decision through sheer force of will. But the human brain doesn't work that way. It is designed to protect energy, resist sudden change, and return to what feels familiar and safe. When you introduce massive changes all at once, your brain interprets them as a threat. And when the brain feels threatened, it fights back. Not with logic, but with cravings, fatigue, procrastination, and self-sabotage. This is why extreme approaches often fail, even when they look impressive on the surface. They rely on motivation, and motivation is unstable. It rises and falls. depending on mood, stress, sleep, and circumstances. When motivation disappears, the system collapses, and when the system collapses, you blame yourself. Over time, this cycle doesn't just prevent change, it actively trains you to distrust yourself. Every broken promise becomes evidence. Every relapse strengthens the belief that you are unreliable. And once you stop trusting yourself, even small commitments feel heavy, risky, and emotionally exhausting. The most dangerous part of this cycle is not the habit itself, whether it's overeating, procrastination, addiction, or avoidance. The most dangerous part is the quiet acceptance that settles in after years of trying and failing. That moment when you stop hoping for something different. When you tell yourself that this is just how life is going to be, that you'll manage, cope, and get by, but never truly change. It's a subtle kind of defeat. You still function. You still go to work, take care of responsibilities, show up for others, but internally you've lowered your expectations of yourself, and that's where potential slowly fades. But what if this entire story is based on a misunderstanding? What if lasting change was never supposed to feel dramatic, heroic, or intense? What if the reason it hasn't worked so far is not because you didn't try hard enough, but because you tried to change too much, too fast? This question is uncomfortable because it challenges everything you've been taught about discipline and self-improvement. It suggests that effort alone is not the answer, and that pushing harder may actually be part of the problem. There is another way to think about change, one that doesn't start with transformation, but with trust. Not trust in a program, a coach, or a perfect plan, but trust in yourself. The kind of trust that is built slowly, quietly, through actions so small they almost feel insignificant. Now, this approach doesn't ask you to become a new person overnight. It asks you to prove something much simpler, that you can keep a promise to yourself today, just today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day. Nothing dramatic, nothing impressive, just consistent. This idea feels almost insulting at first. If you're dealing with a serious habit or a long-standing struggle, the thought of starting small can feel pointless. You want results, you want relief, you want evidence that your effort is worth it. But the truth is that the real damage hasn't been done by the habit itself, it's been done by the repeated experience of giving up on yourself. Before your body, your productivity, or your circumstances can change, that relationship needs to be repaired. There is a philosophy developed over generations that understands this deeply. It doesn't treat human weakness as something to eliminate, but as something to work with. It doesn't demand perfection. It expects imperfection. It doesn't rely on motivation. It builds systems that function even on bad days. And most importantly, it doesn't measure progress by speed, but by direction. This philosophy doesn't ask, how fast can you change? It asks, can you move forward even a little without stopping? If you failed before, this approach is not judging you, it's explaining you. It's saying that your experience makes sense, that your struggles were predictable, and that there is nothing broken inside you. The problem was that you were fighting a long war with short-term weapons. You were trying to win years of conditioning with weeks of effort. Anyone would lose that battle. The question now is not whether you can change. The question is whether you're willing to change how you think about change itself. Whether you're willing to let go of the fantasy of overnight transformation and replace it with something quieter, slower, and far more powerful. Because once you understand this shift, once you see how small actions can rebuild identity and momentum, you'll realize that the door you thought was locked was never locked at all. You were just trying to force it open instead of learning how to turn the key. The moment you remove choice, something strange happens. Discipline stops feeling like an act of strength and starts behaving like a law. Not a rule you follow when you're in the mood, but a gravity you move within whether you like it or not. Most people never experience this because they never fully remove choice. They keep asking themselves questions that slowly drain their energy. When should I do this? How long today? Should I rest or push? Every one of those questions feels harmless, even responsible. In reality, they are the invisible tax you pay every day on consistency. Decision-making feels small, but it accumulates, and eventually the weight of deciding becomes heavier than the action itself. That's when people quit, not because the habit was hard, but because thinking about it became exhausting. This is why motivation-based discipline always collapses. Motivation requires agreement. It asks your emotions for permission, and emotions are unreliable partners. They change with sleep, stress, weather, mood, and distraction. Discipline that depends on agreement is discipline that will eventually be betrayed. The people who appear frighteningly consistent are not stronger emotionally. They've simply engineered their lives so emotion is irrelevant. They don't wake up asking how they feel about the work. They wake up knowing exactly what happens next. No debate, no adjustment, no customization, just execution. And to the modern mind, this feels extreme. We've been taught that flexibility is healthy, that listening to yourself is wise, but what if the self you keep listening to is the very thing keeping you stuck? When choice disappears, resistance becomes loud. This is the phase no one warns you about. The moment your routine becomes fixed, your mind panics. It will invent reasons, philosophies, even moral arguments to bring choice back. It will tell you that rigidity kills creativity, that you're being too hard on yourself, that balance matters more than consistency. These thoughts feel intelligent. They sound reasonable. But they're not new insights. They are survival tactics. Your old identity is fighting to stay alive, because a fixed structure means the end of negotiation, and negotiation is how the inconsistent self survives. As long as there's room to decide later, you never have to fully commit now. This internal conflict is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think the discomfort means something is wrong, that the routine isn't aligned, that they chose the wrong time or method, so they adjust, and in adjusting, they bring choice back in. The discomfort fades, but so does progress. What they don't realize is that the discomfort was the point. It wasn't a signal to stop. It was a signal that the system was working. The mind resists structure because structure exposes patterns. It forces repetition. And repetition is where identities dissolve. When you do the same thing at the same time in the same way day after day, there's nowhere to hide. You can't pretend it's special. You can't wait for the perfect mood. You either do it or you don't. That binary is terrifying, but it's also freeing. At this stage, many people make a partial commitment. They fix the time, but not the action. Or they fix the action, but not the response to disruption. They think they've removed choice, but they've only relocated it. Instead of negotiating when, they negotiate what. Instead of negotiating what, they negotiate how much. The mind is clever. It will always search for a loophole. That's why discipline fails when it's treated as a feeling instead of a system. Systems don't argue. They don't compromise. They don't explain themselves. They run. And when they're designed correctly, they keep running even when you don't want them to. As the structure tightens, something uncomfortable emerges. Boredom. Not the casual boredom of having nothing to do, but the deep boredom of repetition without novelty. The kind that makes you restless, irritable, and suspicious. This is where people convince themselves they need variety. They'll say repetition kills passion, that switching things up keeps you engaged. But variety is a stimulant, not a stabilizer. It excites the mind but weakens the pattern. Every new option reintroduces choice. Every adjustment invites negotiation. Consistency doesn't thrive on excitement, it thrives on predictability. The brain learns sequences through sameness, not stimulation. When the sequence becomes predictable, effort drops, resistance fades, action becomes automatic. But you have to survive the boredom first. This is also where social pressure intensifies. People around you will notice that you're no longer flexible, that you don't adapt your routine to convenience. They'll interpret this as stubbornness or obsession. They might worry about you. They might mock you. They might try to pull you back into normal rhythms. Not out of malice, but out of discomfort. Your fixed behavior highlights their fluidity, and fluidity feels safe until it's contrasted with permanence. This is why extreme discipline often feels lonely. It separates you from the emotional patterns of others. You're no longer syncing your actions to moods, events, or social energy. You're syncing them to a system. And systems don't bend to feelings. As days turn into weeks, something subtle begins to shift. The routine stops feeling like an imposition and starts feeling like a default. You no longer prepare mentally. You no longer psych yourself up. You simply move. And this is where discipline crosses a threshold. It stops being something you maintain and becomes something that maintains itself. You don't feel proud. You don't feel inspired. You feel neutral, calm, almost mechanical. And to someone still living inside motivation, this looks cold. But neutrality is powerful. It means the action no longer depends on emotional fuel. It runs on structure alone. Then life intervenes. It always does. Illness, travel, stress, unexpected obligations. This is where most systems collapse because they weren't built for disruption. They assumed ideal conditions, and ideal conditions are rare. When disruption appears, choice rushes back in. Should I skip today? Should I adjust? Should I wait until things settle? These questions feel reasonable in chaos, but chaos is exactly when structure matters most. The people who stay consistent through disruption are not stronger. They're prepared. They decided in advance what happens when things go wrong. There is no improvisation under pressure. Improvisation is just negotiation in disguise. This is the moment discipline reveals its true nature. It isn't about control. It's about pre-commitment. About making decisions when you're calm so you don't have to make them when you're compromised. When the response is already written, stress loses its power. You don't ask what to do. You do what was already decided. And that certainty changes how your nervous system responds. Anxiety decreases, resistance weakens, action becomes smoother, not because life got easier, but because thinking was removed from the critical moment. By the time you reach this point, discipline no longer feels heroic. It feels ordinary, almost boring. And that's when it becomes dangerous in the best way. Dangerous to old patterns, dangerous to excuses, dangerous to the version of you that relied on emotion to justify inaction. This is where consistency becomes unsettling to others, because it doesn't fluctuate, it doesn't announce itself, it doesn't seek approval, it just continues. And when something continues long enough without negotiation, it stops being a habit. It becomes a trait. At some point, learning stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like expression. This is the stage Shuhari points toward but never promises. It cannot be forced, rushed, or faked. It arrives quietly after discipline has reshaped your instincts and repetition has carved understanding into your nervous system. Section 3 is not about becoming different from others. It is about becoming fully aligned with what you have learned, so deeply that technique disappears and only intent remains. This is the phase where people from the outside say it looks effortless, unaware of how much structure, struggle, and patience made that effortlessness possible. In this stage, rules no longer sit in your mind as instructions. They live in your body as reflex. You don't think about what to do next, because your awareness is no longer trapped in mechanics. Your attention shifts outward. You notice timing, flow, and subtle changes that were invisible before. This is where learning becomes adaptive in real time. You are no longer reacting late or correcting after mistakes. You adjust in the moment. This alone is what makes learning appear 10 times faster, because there is no longer friction between decision and action. A key misunderstanding about this stage is that it means freedom from discipline. In reality, it is discipline that has been internalized so completely that it feels like freedom. You are not breaking rules recklessly. You are transcending them responsibly. Every deviation is intentional. Every simplification is earned. You can strip things down to their essence because you understand what matters and what doesn't. This is why true masters often look simple, rather than complex. Complexity belongs to learning. Simplicity belongs to understanding. Emotionally, this stage feels calm, not exciting, not dramatic, not euphoric. Calm. You are no longer proving yourself to anyone, including yourself. Your identity is not attached to outcomes. Success doesn't inflate you, and failure doesn't crush you. This emotional neutrality is often misunderstood as lack of passion, but it is the opposite. It is passion without insecurity. You care deeply, but you are not desperate. This mental state allows consistency at a level most people never reach. Another shift that happens here is that effort becomes efficient. You don't grind endlessly, you don't overtrain, you don't overthink. You know exactly how much is enough for progress today. This is not laziness, it is precision. You have learned how to listen to feedback from your body, mind, and environment. When to push, when to rest, when to stop. This sensitivity prevents burnout and allows learning to continue over long periods without collapse. Speed over years beats intensity over weeks, and this stage understands that truth intuitively. Teaching also changes meaning at this level. Even if you are not formally teaching others, your presence teaches. People learn by watching how you move, decide, and respond under pressure. You no longer explain everything verbally, because explanation is no longer the primary medium. Demonstration is. And when you do speak, your words carry weight because they come from experience, not theory. You say less, but each sentence lands deeper. One of the most powerful aspects of this stage is adaptability. You are no longer dependent on specific conditions to perform well. Changes in environment, tools, or circumstances don't throw you off. You adjust naturally. This is the hallmark of true understanding. Anyone can perform when conditions are perfect. Mastery shows when conditions are imperfect. This adaptability is why learning accelerates dramatically here. You don't have to relearn from scratch every time something changes. You translate principles instantly. Your relationship with mistakes also evolves again. In earlier stages, mistakes were lessons. Now, they are rare and small, and when they happen, they are corrected almost instantly. There is no emotional charge, no frustration, no self-criticism, just adjustment. This emotional efficiency saves enormous mental energy, which is then redirected into awareness and refinement. The less energy you waste on reaction, the more you have available for perception. At this level, creativity emerges naturally, not the forced creativity of trying to be different, but the organic creativity that comes from deep familiarity. You see connections others don't because your understanding is layered. You combine ideas without effort because you understand their core principles. Innovation stops being risky because it is grounded. You are not guessing. You are extending what you know into new territory with confidence. There is also a quiet humility in this stage. You recognize how much there still is to learn, not in a discouraging way, but in an expansive one. Learning no longer feels like a race to an end point. It feels like a lifelong relationship. You are comfortable being a student forever, because your sense of worth is no longer tied to completion. This mindset removes pressure, and paradoxically, removing pressure is what allows peak performance to emerge consistently. Time feels different here as well. You are present, fully engaged. Hours can pass without resistance because your mind is not fighting the process. This state of absorption is often called flow, but in Shuhari, it is simply the result of alignment. When skill, awareness, and intent line up, time loses its grip. Learning in this state compounds rapidly because attention is undivided. Perhaps the most important transformation in this final stage is identity. You no longer say, "I am learning this." You say, "This is part of how I live." The skill integrates into how you think, solve problems, and interact with the world. It shapes your character, not just your ability. This is why ancient traditions never separated skill from philosophy. Learning was not just about doing something well. It was about becoming someone different through the process. This stage cannot be copied. It cannot be hacked. It cannot be summarized into steps. It emerges only after respect for the basics, patience through struggle, and honesty in self-observation. This is why Shuhari remains relevant across centuries. It understands human nature deeply. It knows that speed without depth collapses, and depth without patience never forms. True acceleration comes from alignment, not shortcuts. When people ask how to learn 10 times faster, they usually want techniques. Shuhari offers something more powerful. It offers a way of relating to learning itself. Section 3 shows that the fastest learners are not those who rush ahead, but those who integrate fully. They move smoothly because nothing inside them is resisting the process. Their mind, body, and intent move as one. In the end, this stage is not about arriving. It is about continuity. Learning becomes self-sustaining. Curiosity remains alive. Discipline remains effortless. Growth remains steady. And the secret reveals itself clearly. Mastery is not the absence of effort, but the absence of friction. When friction disappears, speed is no longer something you chase. It becomes the natural result of deep understanding lived consistently over time.